My name is Nora Callahan, and for as long as I can remember, the house I grew up in smelled like ambition that belonged to everyone except me. It was a narrow brownstone on Prescott Avenue in Hartford, Connecticut, the kind of street where neighbors noticed if your lawn wasn't trimmed and remembered if your kid didn't make varsity. My father was a civil engineer who built bridges for a living and expected his children to build something equally visible, equally concrete, equally understood at a dinner party. My mother taught high school history and believed that a woman's greatest achievement was a combination of a respectable career, a respectable husband, and a respectable amount of silence about anything that didn't fit both. My older brother Daniel gave them everything they wanted. He was 31 to my 26, broad-shouldered, charming in the way that made strangers trust him immediately, and he had been accepted to Yale Law at 22. By the time I was finishing college, Daniel was already a junior partner at Harman & Sloan, one of the most respected litigation firms in New England. He wore his success the way other men wear cologne. You noticed it the moment he walked into a room. I wore mine differently. I wore it like a secret. From the outside, I understood exactly how my life looked. I was 23 when I moved back into my childhood bedroom after graduation, and I was still there at 26. I drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked side mirror. I didn't go to brunch. I didn't date anyone my mother considered suitable. I worked from a small desk wedged beside my old bookshelf, on a laptop that was 3 years old, and I kept my door closed almost always. My mother knocked on that door more times than I can count. Nora, Daniel, and Jennifer are coming for dinner Sunday. Please don't spend the whole meal staring at your phone. Nora, Mrs. Pearson's son, is a financial advisor now. Very stable. I could give her your number. Nora, your father and I are just worried. You never talk about what you're actually doing in there. I always answered the same way. I'm working, Mom. And I would smile, and I would close the door again. What I did not tell her, what I did not tell anyone in that house, was that 18 months after moving back in, I had quietly incorporated a company called Lattice Analytics. What I did not tell her was that Lattice had spent its first year building a proprietary data infrastructure tool that helped mid-sized logistics companies predict supply chain disruptions before they happened. What I did not tell her was that by the time she was knocking on my door asking about Mrs. Pearson's son, the financial advisor, Lattice, had already signed contracts with 4 regional distribution companies and was generating just under $2 million in annual recurring revenue. I did not tell her because I had tried, once, early on. I was 23, 2 months out of college, sitting at the dinner table eating my mother's pot roast, and I tried to explain what I was building. I had my laptop open. I had diagrams. I walked my father through the core problem that most logistics companies were still reacting to supply chain failures rather than predicting them, that the modeling tools available were either too expensive for smaller operators or too rigid to adapt in real time, and that I had spent my senior year writing the architecture for something that could change that. My father listened with the patient expression he reserved for things he had already decided were not serious. When I finished, he set down his fork and said, "That sounds very complicated, Nora. But who's going to pay you for that?" Daniel laughed, not unkindly. "The market for that kind of tool is pretty saturated, isn't it? The big players have entire teams working on this stuff." "Not for companies under $1 billion in revenue," I said. "That's exactly the gap." My mother reached over and touched my hand. "We just want you to have something stable, sweetheart. Something real." I closed my laptop. I did not open it at the dinner table again. What followed was 3 years of a very particular kind of silence, not the silence of giving up, the silence of deciding that explanation was a waste of energy I needed elsewhere. I worked 16 hours a day in that small room. I hired 2 contractors remotely, a back-end engineer named Priya who worked out of Austin, and a systems architect named Marcus who was based in Seattle. I communicated with investors by phone and by video call, and none of them ever saw my childhood bedroom because I always positioned my camera against a blank white wall. My family saw a woman who had moved back home, drove a cracked Honda, and stared at a laptop all day. They filled in the rest themselves. My mother started what she called gentle conversations over breakfast, which were not gentle. She would sit across from me with her coffee and say things like, "Daniel mentioned there might be a paralegal position opening at his firm. You're organized. You're smart. It would be a real start." Or, I was talking to your Aunt Carol, and she said the school district is hiring. You have a degree in data science, but teaching pays benefits. My father was quieter about it, which in some ways was worse. He didn't suggest things. He just looked at me with a certain careful expression, the one that said he had revised his expectations downward and was trying to be gracious about it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in November. Daniel and Jennifer were over for dinner again. Jennifer was finishing her residency in cardiology, which my mother mentioned approximately 4 times over the course of the meal. At some point, the conversation turned to Thanksgiving plans, and then to the house, and then the way it always eventually did to me. We were thinking, my mother said, looking at her plate rather than at me, that if Nora isn't going to be using the room for anything serious, we might convert it. Your father and I have been talking about finally having a proper home office. The table was quiet. The room I'm living in, I said. You could find an apartment, sweetheart. Something small. It might be good for you, actually more independence. She said this as though independence were something I lacked, as though the company I had been running for 2 years from that room had nothing to do with independence. Jennifer and I could help you look, Daniel offered. He meant it kindly. That was almost the worst part. I looked at my father. He was cutting his chicken with the focused attention of a man who had already agreed to this conversation and did not want to be its spokesperson. When? I asked. We were thinking after the new year, my mother said. I nodded. I finished my dinner. I helped clear the table. I went upstairs and I sat at my desk and I looked at the Lattice dashboard on my screen, which showed a pipeline of 7 enterprise prospects, 3 of which were in final contract negotiations, and a current ARR that had crossed $4 million 2 weeks earlier, and I made a decision. I would find an apartment. I would move out after the new year, exactly as they suggested. But I would not explain why the timeline worked perfectly for me. I would not tell them about the Series A term sheet sitting in my email from Brightwater Ventures, a San Francisco firm that had been tracking Lattice for 8 months. I would not tell them that the term sheet was for $9 million at a valuation that would make me, on paper, worth considerably more than anyone at that dinner table had ever imagined. I would simply leave. I signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in the West End on December 28th. I moved my desk, my monitors, my servers, and approximately 12 boxes of files into the 2nd bedroom. I furnished the rest of the apartment simply a couch, a bed, a coffee maker that cost $40. The Honda stayed. There was nothing about the outside of my life that would have suggested anything had changed. I told my parents I had found a place. My mother said she was glad I was being practical. My father said he hoped it wasn't too expensive. Daniel texted me a moving company recommendation. I did not use it. The Series A closed on February 14th. $9 million. Brightwater led the round. 2 other firms participated. The valuation put Lattice at $38 million, which meant my equity stake, which I had been careful to protect through every contract negotiation, was worth just under $22 million. I sat alone in my apartment and ate leftover Thai food and looked at the wire confirmation on my screen for a very long time. Then I hired 3 full-time engineers, a head of sales, and a director of customer success. I upgraded my laptop. I did not upgrade the Honda. I want to be clear about something, because I have thought about it often in the months since. I was not hiding my success to set up some dramatic reveal. I was not waiting for a perfect moment to make my family feel small. That is not who I am, and more practically, that kind of performance takes energy I was not willing to spend. I was quiet because explanation had always cost me more than it returned. Every conversation I had tried to have about Lattice in its early days had ended the same way, with polite skepticism that was somehow more deflating than outright doubt. My father asking who would pay for it, my brother citing saturation, my mother reaching across the table to touch my hand as though I were fragile instead of focused. So I stopped explaining, and in the silence, I built something real. The call came on a Thursday morning in April. I was in my apartment, on a video call with Priya and Marcus and our new head of sales, walking through a pipeline review. We had just passed $6 million in ARR and were in conversations with a national freight company that would, if it closed, triple our revenue in a single contract. My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. I glanced at it. Unknown number, New York area code. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Same number. I excused myself from the call. This is Nora Callahan. Miss Callahan, this is Robert Vance calling from Forbes Media. I'm working on a feature for our April technology issue, specifically a piece on emerging enterprise software founders under 35. We've been tracking Lattice Analytics for about 6 months, and we'd like to include you. Do you have a few minutes to talk? I sat down on the edge of my desk. I have a few minutes, I said. I want to be honest. My first feeling was not triumph. It was something quieter than that. It was the feeling of a door opening that I had not knocked on, in a hallway I had been walking alone for a long time. Robert was professional and thorough. He asked about the founding story, the gap in the market, the Series A, the growth trajectory. He asked who had believed in me early on. I paused at that one. My earliest supporters were my co-founders at the contractor level, I said carefully. Priya and Marcus. And the team at Brightwater. They saw what we were building before. It was easy to see. He asked if family had been part of the journey. My family is in Hartford, I said. We're close. I left it at that. The article ran 6 weeks later. It was not a small mention. It was a full profile, 2 pages in print, with a photograph taken at our new office in Boston, which we had moved into 3 months earlier. The headline read, "The Quiet Architect, How Nora Callahan Built a $40 million Company While Nobody Was Watching." I found out my mother saw it because she called me at 7:45 in the morning on a Friday. Nora. Her voice was strange, compressed. "Hi, Mom. I'm looking at something." "Okay. Is this—" She stopped. I heard her breathing. "Is this you? In Forbes?" "Yes." The silence that followed was not like any silence I had heard from her before. My mother was a woman who filled silence the way water fills a container immediately, completely, taking the shape of whatever was available. This silence had no shape, it just sat there. $40 million? She said finally. Not a question. Just the words, out loud, as though she were testing whether they were real. The company's valuation. Yes. Nora. She said my name again, and this time it broke open slightly at the end. Why didn't you tell us? I had thought about this moment. I had run through different versions of it in my head at various points over the past 3 years. What I would say, how I would say it, whether I would be generous or honest or some calibrated combination of both. I had imagined saying it gently. I had imagined saying it with distance. What I had not imagined was how tired I would feel when it actually arrived. I tried, I said. At the beginning, you were at the table. Dad asked who would pay me for it. Daniel said the market was saturated. You touched my hand like I needed comfort. Another silence. I didn't stop trying to tell you because I was hiding something, I continued. I stopped because every time I started, the conversation told me what you thought before I finished. So I stopped finishing. I heard her set something down, a mug, I think. Your father needs to see this, she said quietly. I know. My father called an hour later. He was not a man who cried, or if he was, he had never done it in front of me. His voice on the phone was controlled in the way that voices get when control is the only thing left. He said, I owe you an apology, Nora. A real one, not just for today. I told him I knew that. I didn't understand what you were building, he said. I know you didn't. I should have asked more. Instead of he didn't finish. Instead of assuming, I said. Yes. It was not a dramatic conversation. There were no tears from either of us. No speeches. No moment where years of distance dissolved in a single exchange. It was a quiet, careful beginning of something that would take a lot longer than one phone call to actually repair. But it was real, and my father, whatever else I can say about him, had never been someone who said things he didn't mean. Daniel texted me that afternoon. Just saw the Forbes piece. I don't even know what to say. I'm proud of you. I'm also sorry I said that about market saturation. That was lazy of me. I read it twice. Then I typed back, thank you, that means something. And it did. Here is what I want to say to whoever is watching this, because I think it matters. I did not keep quiet in order to win. I kept quiet because I had learned that explaining yourself to people who have already decided what you are is a form of asking for permission, and I was not willing to spend 3 years asking for permission to build something real. The validation, the Forbes profile, my father's apology, Daniel's text, none of it changed what Lattice was. It was already real before anyone in my family knew about it. The company didn't become worth $40 million the morning my mother saw the article. It had been worth that for months. The only thing that changed was what my family could see. And that, I realized sitting alone in my apartment on that Friday morning with my phone in my hand, was always the real issue. Not what I was building, but what they were capable of seeing. I have since moved into a better apartment. I still have the Honda. I am working on letting that go. Lattice is now in conversations with 2 of the 5 largest freight companies in North America. We have 23 full-time employees. We just closed a Series B that I am not able to discuss in detail yet, except to say that the number involved requires more than 8 digits. My mother calls me every Sunday. She asks about the team, about the product, about things she does not fully understand but makes genuine effort to learn. Last month, she told her book club about what I do. She got some of the technical details wrong, but she said my name with a pride that I had not heard before, and she did not correct herself when she realized, and I did not correct her either. My father came to our Boston office in March. He walked through the space slowly, looked at the team working, looked at the product roadmap on the wall, looked at the framed article. Yes, I framed it. I am not going to pretend otherwise, and he said, very quietly, "You built bridges too. Just not the kind I knew how to see." I did not say anything for a long moment. Then I said, "I know, Dad." And I meant it without anger, which I think was the hardest and most important thing I have ever built.